In February, the central Atlantic carries a steady rhythm. The trade winds move from east to west across a broad expanse of open water, pushing long, even swells toward the Caribbean. The air is temperate but unsettled. Squalls form without warning, pass quickly, and leave the surface altered. The sea here is rarely still. It rolls in patient intervals, unbroken by land for thousands of miles. Shipping routes cross these waters, but they are sparse. A vessel can sail for days without sighting another hull. Radar extends only so far. Beyond that is horizon and curvature. At night the sky lowers and the ocean becomes a dark plain with no reference point. In winter months, cold fronts sweep down from the North Atlantic and intersect the trade winds. The result is variable weather, periods of calm followed by sudden disturbance. Small craft rely on forecasting, seamanship, and design. There is no coastline to retreat to, no harbor lies within easy reach. Mid-ocean sailing demands distance from everything solid. It offers movement, but little margin. In early February 1982, a single 30-foot sloop was crossing this region alone. It moved westward from the Canary Islands, carried by the prevailing winds. For weeks it was one small shape on a large and indifferent surface. Stephen Callahan was 30 years old in 1982. He had trained as a naval architect at the University of Michigan, and later at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. His work centered on small craft design. He understood hull structure, balance, and the behavior of vessels in heavy weather. Sailing was not an abstraction to him. It was both profession and practice. In the late 1970s, Callahan began designing a compact ocean-going sloop that could be handled by a single person. The boat would be light, efficient, and capable of crossing open water. He named it Napoleon Solo. The hull measured approximately 21 feet in length at the waterline, with an overall length just under 30 feet, including bowsprit and rudder assembly. It was constructed primarily of fiberglass over a foam core. The design emphasized buoyancy and self-sufficiency. He built much of the vessel himself. In 1981, Callahan sailed Napoleon Solo across the Atlantic from the United States to England as part of the Observer single-handed transatlantic race. The voyage was not without difficulty. The boat sustained damage during the race, and Callahan withdrew before completion. Repairs followed in England. By early 1982, he prepared to return westward. The plan was a solo crossing from the Canary Islands to the Caribbean. This route followed the established trade wind passage used for centuries. With favorable winds, a small yacht could complete the journey in several weeks. Callahan departed from the Canary Islands in late January 1982. On board were navigation tools, emergency provisions, and survival equipment typical for offshore sailing of the time. Among them was a 6-man inflatable life raft packed in a fiberglass canister. There were also flares, water containers, fishing gear, and a sextant for celestial navigation. He sailed alone. Solo ocean crossings require continuous vigilance. The sailor manages sail trim, course corrections, weather assessment, and maintenance without assistance. Sleep is divided into short intervals. Alarms are set to check for traffic or changing wind conditions. The vessel becomes both shelter and instrument. For several days after departure, conditions were stable. The trade winds filled the sails steadily. Napoleon Solo progressed westward across open water. There was no immediate sign of hazard. The yacht was small but purpose-built for the journey. Callahan later wrote that he had confidence in the boat's structure. He knew its laminate thickness, its reinforcement points, its limitations. He had designed it with care. The Atlantic crossing, while demanding, was a familiar endeavor for experienced sailors. It involved distance, endurance, and navigation, but it did not inherently promise disaster. Thousands had completed similar passages before. In the first week of February 1982, Napoleon Solo sailed under a dark sky in moderate conditions. The wind remained consistent, the sea state was manageable. Nothing in those early days suggested the voyage would extend beyond the expected duration. The ocean offered no warning. On the night of February 4, 1982, Stephen Callahan was alone below deck aboard Napoleon Solo. The yacht was approximately 800 miles west of the Canary Islands, well into the Atlantic crossing. The wind was moderate. The boat was making steady progress under sail. Shortly after midnight, he was thrown violently against the interior of the cabin. The impact was sudden and forceful. He later described it as a collision with something large and solid. There were no navigation lights visible beforehand, no sound of another vessel approaching. He never identified the object. It may have been a whale or floating debris. The cause remains uncertain. Water began entering the hull almost immediately. Callahan inspected the forward section of the boat and found a significant breach below the waterline. The structure had been compromised. The influx of seawater was rapid. Manual pumping could not keep pace. The yacht was taking on water beyond recovery. He activated the emergency procedures he had prepared for, but never expected to use. On deck, he deployed the inflatable life raft from its canister. It expanded into a small circular shelter tethered to the sinking yacht. Working quickly in darkness, he gathered what supplies he could reach: a small grab bag, some food, navigation tools, a sleeping bag, and emergency equipment. He also managed to retrieve a handheld sextant, a few flares, and limited provisions from the cabin. The boat continued to settle. Within minutes, Napoleon Solo was no longer afloat. Callahan entered the life raft as the yacht slipped beneath the surface. The tether was cut. The raft drifted free. The sinking ended the voyage. He was alone on an inflatable raft in the mid-Atlantic, surrounded by open water in all directions. The nearest land lay hundreds of miles away. There was no radio contact. No other vessel was visible. The ocean resumed its steady movement as if uninterrupted. Isolation became absolute. The life raft measured approximately 6 feet in diameter. It was circular, with an inflatable floor and tubular sides. A small canopy arched overhead, designed to shield occupants from wind and spray. It was not rigid. It flexed with every swell. Inside, space was limited. Movement required balance. Every object had to be secured, or it would shift with the motion of the sea. Callahan began by inventorying what remained. From the sinking yacht, he had salvaged a sleeping bag, some emergency rations, a few tools, a flashlight, and basic navigation instruments. The raft itself contained a standard emergency pack: flares, a signaling mirror, a knife, a small repair kit, several packets of high-calorie survival biscuits, and a limited water supply. There were also 2 small solar stills, clear plastic devices designed to distill seawater using evaporation and condensation. The initial freshwater supply was minimal. It would last only days if rationed carefully. The first task was stability. He secured the canopy and arranged the equipment to prevent loss. The raft trailed a sea anchor, a drogue that created drag and kept the craft oriented into the waves. Without it, the raft would spin and risk capsizing. Callahan assessed his injuries. The collision had left bruising and soreness, but no broken bones. Physical function was intact. Food and water calculations followed. The emergency biscuits were calorie-dense but limited in quantity. If consumed sparingly, they might extend survival for several weeks. The water supply, however, posed the greater constraint. He deployed the solar stills. Each still consisted of a plastic bag floating in the water, with a collection chamber suspended inside. Sunlight heated seawater within the bag. Evaporation occurred. Fresh water condensed on the interior surface and dripped into the collection pouch. Under ideal conditions, each still could produce less than 1 liter per day. Conditions were not always ideal. Cloud cover reduced output. Swells disrupted positioning. Salt residue accumulated. The devices required constant monitoring. Rain, when it came, offered relief. He rigged fabric and plastic surfaces to channel precipitation into containers. Storm squalls could yield several liters in minutes. Clear days, by contrast, produced little. Within the first week, Callahan recognized that fishing would become essential. The Raft's emergency kit included a basic fishing line and hooks. He supplemented these with improvised lures made from materials salvaged from the boat, bits of metal, reflective fragments, and strands of cordage. He trailed lines behind the raft and waited. Small fish began to appear beneath the raft's shadow. Floating debris attracts marine life. The raft became a minor ecosystem. Triggerfish, dorado, and other species circled below. The first successful catch marked a shift from passive survival to active sustenance. Raw fish provided protein and moisture. He learned to conserve every part. Flesh was eaten fresh. Internal fluids were consumed. Bones and skin were used as bait for larger fish. Nothing was discarded unnecessarily. He fashioned a small spear from available materials to improve his success rate. Fishing required strength and timing. Striking at moving targets from an unstable platform demanded precision. Sharks also appeared. Oceanic whitetips and other species followed the raft intermittently. They investigated vibrations and scent. At times they struck the raft's underside. Their presence required vigilance. A puncture in the inflatable chambers would have been catastrophic. On several occasions, teeth pierced the outer layer. Repairs became routine. The raft's repair kit contained adhesive patches. Applying them required deflation of affected compartments, drying of surfaces, and careful sealing, all while adrift. Salt water complicated adhesion. Sun exposure degraded materials. He worked methodically, understanding that structural failure meant immediate loss of shelter. Navigation remained uncertain. Callahan possessed a sextant and an almanac salvaged before the yacht sank. With these he attempted celestial fixes when weather allowed. However, without a stable platform and with limited timekeeping precision, calculations were approximate. He estimated his drift westward with the trade winds and equatorial currents. The north equatorial current would likely carry him toward the Caribbean if he remained within its flow. He kept written notes on scraps of material, recording days and observations. Time was marked by sunrise and sunset. Counting was necessary. Without it, chronology would dissolve. Daily routine developed gradually. Mornings involved checking the raft for leaks and inspecting the solar stills. Midday heat required protection from exposure. The canopy provided partial shade but trapped humidity. Skin blistered. Salt sores formed where wet fabric rubbed against the body. Fishing occupied much of the afternoon. Evenings were devoted to maintenance and navigation attempts when stars were visible. Sleep came in fragments. The raft rose and fell continuously. Waves slapped against the sides. Storms forced him to brace against capsizing. During squalls, he collected rainwater while securing equipment. Weight loss began early. Caloric intake fluctuated with fishing success. Some days yielded ample catch. Others provided nothing. The emergency rations diminished steadily. He learned to conserve motion. Energy expenditure had to match intake. Even simple tasks required calculation. Reaching too quickly risked overturning the raft. Sudden shifts could dislodge equipment. Psychological discipline proved as important as physical management. Callahan later described dividing the ordeal into manageable units. He focused on tasks rather than outcome, repairing a seam, securing a line, cleaning a solar still. Each completed action reinforced continuity. Passing ships were rare. On several occasions, vessels appeared on the horizon. He ignited flares when within visual range. The small arcs of red light faded without response. Distance and scale worked against him. A life raft sits low in the water. In moderate seas, it disappears between swells. After missed sightings, he recalibrated expectations. Signaling required proximity and clear line of sight. Most ships never came close enough. As weeks passed, the raft deteriorated. Ultraviolet radiation weakened fabric. Salt crystals abraded seams. Repeated shark contact left marks. The floor lost pressure gradually. Repairs multiplied. Adhesive supplies diminished. His body adapted unevenly. Hands toughened from handling lines and fish. Skin darkened under exposure. Muscles thinned. Saltwater immersion caused sores along legs and feet. Dehydration episodes occurred when solar output dropped. He continued to estimate his position, believing drift was carrying him toward the Lesser Antilles. Whether this assumption was accurate remained uncertain. The ocean did not alter its rhythm. Days of calm alternated with sudden squalls. Flying fish occasionally landed inside the raft, offering unexpected food. Storm waves lifted him high before dropping the raft into troughs where sky disappeared. By the 40th day, survival had become systematic. There was no longer shock, only process. The raft was both fragile and sufficient. The sea was constant. He remained within its movement, sustained by deliberate action and measured restraint. By the 6th week, the effects of prolonged exposure were measurable. Callahan had lost a significant portion of his body weight. Muscle mass diminished, movements slowed. Tasks that had once required planning now required recovery time. Even pulling in a moderate-sized fish strained his arms and shoulders. Hydration remained uncertain. Solar stills functioned inconsistently. Cloud cover reduced output for days at a time. Rain squalls, when they arrived, restored reserves quickly but unpredictably. He adjusted intake according to availability, sometimes drinking more when supply was strong, knowing future days might provide little. Salt sores deepened along his lower body. Continuous dampness and friction prevented healing. Minor cuts from fishing hooks or sharp fins lingered. Infection was a persistent risk, though no major systemic illness developed. The raft continued to degrade. Repeated shark encounters resulted in additional punctures. On more than one occasion, a shark struck the underside with force, drawn by the movement of hooked fish. The outer chamber absorbed most impacts, but small tears required immediate repair. Adhesive patches were finite. Each use reduced future options. At times, the raft lost air overnight. He would wake to find the floor softening beneath him. Repairs were conducted with care, balancing urgency against material conservation. Failure would have left him directly in the water, exposed to current and predators. Ships appeared infrequently. When they did, the distance was often too great. He discharged flares when possible. The small bursts of light faded against the horizon. No course changes followed. The psychological effect of missed rescue opportunities accumulated quietly. He did not abandon signaling, but expectations narrowed. Navigation calculations suggested continued westward drift. The trade winds persisted. He believed the north equatorial current was carrying him toward the Caribbean basin. However, without precise instruments or confirmed position, these assessments remained approximate. Time perception altered. Days were counted carefully, yet their distinction blurred. Weather patterns repeated. Fishing routines cycled. Repairs followed damage. Physical discomfort became constant, but unremarkable. Energy management grew stricter. He reduced unnecessary motion. Fishing attempts were timed for highest probability. Equipment was organized to minimize effort. Even turning within the raft required consideration. Despite deterioration, cognitive function remained stable. He continued charting estimated positions when skies allowed celestial observation. He maintained written records as materials permitted. Structure preserved orientation. By early April, more than 2 months had passed since the collision. The raft, weathered and patched, remained afloat. Callahan, thinner and weakened, remained aboard it. The Atlantic continued its steady movement westward. In mid-April 1982, after more than 10 weeks adrift, signs of change appeared. Floating vegetation increased. Fragments of plant life and debris passed more frequently alongside the raft. Seabirds were sighted in greater numbers. These indicators suggested proximity to land. On April 19, 1982, Stephen Callahan saw what appeared to be distant shoreline. The outline was faint at first, intermittent between swells. As the raft drifted closer, the shape resolved into the island of Guadeloupe in the Lesser Antilles. The current carried him toward the eastern side of the island, near Marie-Galante. After 76 days at sea, the raft approached coastal waters. Local fishermen spotted the small inflatable craft offshore. They navigated toward it and found Callahan inside, severely weakened but conscious. He was unable to stand without assistance. His body weight had dropped substantially, later documented at approximately 100 pounds, a loss of nearly one-third of his original weight. He was brought ashore and transported for medical evaluation. Despite extreme weight loss, dehydration episodes, and skin damage from prolonged saltwater exposure, he had avoided fatal infection and major organ failure. Recovery began gradually under supervision. The raft, damaged and extensively repaired, had remained afloat long enough to complete the drift across the Atlantic basin. The crossing had ended not with a harbor arrival under sail, but with a quiet retrieval from open water. 76 days after the collision, the isolation concluded. Stephen Callahan's drift lasted 76 days and covered an estimated 800 nautical miles across the Atlantic Ocean. His account, later documented in his 1986 book Adrift, 76 Days Lost at Sea, became one of the most detailed modern records of open ocean survival in a life raft. The incident has been studied by sailors, naval architects, and survival experts for its practical lessons. It demonstrated the value of preparation, disciplined rationing, and systematic problem-solving under prolonged isolation. It also revealed the limits of equipment exposed continuously to salt, sun, and impact. Callahan survived not through a single dramatic act, but through sustained maintenance of tools, of body, and of sequence. The Atlantic crossing he intended was never completed as planned. Instead, it became a different kind of passage. The ocean resumed its pattern after his rescue. His raft drifted no further. Oh,